everyone, and welcome to 180 Degrees of Impact. My name is Matt Scott, and today I'm joined by Venkayla Haynes, who is right here. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
No, I appreciate you being part of this, and I don't know, it's really good to hear from you about your journey, because honestly, one thing that I noticed just looking, well, I've been familiar with you and your work a little bit over the past couple of years, I guess, at this point, but really just looking at all of the things you do so much. You have so many like titles and organizations you're in, and so I really couldn't do your introduction justice. So I would love if you could introduce yourself to the 180 Degrees of Impact audience.
Hi, everyone. My name is Venkayla Haynes. I'm an organizer. I work on issues that fight against gender-based violence, which is like sexual assault, domestic violence, stalking, things like that. I am a regional advisor for It's On Us, which is an organization that was launched by the Obama administration to fight against sexual assault on college campuses. I also work with development and communication with Know Your Nine, which is an organization that educates students on their Title IX rights and helps survivors. And I have recently been named to the Biden Foundation Advisory Council for Ending Violence Against Women.
Awesome. That's a good way to sum it up. And I think it's funny just because I know that there's a lot more that's out there, but that's actually one reason that I keep seeing your name, because it's like you look at like NRIT on campus. Oh, like there's Venkayla. You look at now the foundation. There's Venkayla. So it's on us. There's Venkayla. So I'm curious, like how you decide to get involved in the activism space. I know that, like, obviously from your story, of course, about like, you know, your experience with assault, but when did you decide to take the leap to actually become an activist?
It was my sophomore year at Spelman. I kind of had to deal with sexual assault on my own and kind of try to like navigate through school, which was really, really hard for me. So I decided to go to this event that was on campus. It was called, I really don't remember the name. It was an event where people were just telling their stories about sexual assault, breast cancer, alcoholism, and things like that. So I went there to tell my story. I was very scared because everybody that was going up they were so amazing, a lot of crying and things like that. So I kept pushing my time back. So I'm like, I want to go last, or I want to go after this, I want to go after that. But like, I was very, very nervous. So once it was my turn to go, I started talking, and then I just started shaking, and then I started crying. It was a very good way for me to like lift the burden off my shoulders, but it was just a lot for me. So like after that event, telling my story, my friends actually kind of inspired me to say, hey, you should help other survivors, you should speak out more. So I'm like, okay. So that's how I started getting involved with just like other organizations such as It's On Us. It's On Us was the first sexual assault organization I ever got involved with. I reached out to them and I was like, hey, I want to get involved, I want to help. And they just told me that you can do events on your campus, but I wanted to do more. So when they came out with the student advisory committee, I applied for that and I started doing more events on campus. And then Joe Biden came to campus and I got the chance to introduce him and tell my story on TV, which was very, very scary for me. And just like talk to him about my personal story. And that's how like survivors started reaching out to me. Like once they saw me on TV and helping with the vice president's initiative, they started reaching out, which kind of just like my activism just like shot off in a way.
Yeah, it's like it's really interesting, because one thing I was sort of alluding to earlier was that like how I'm so overwhelmed by like the community, because so many people within this community of like advocates, activists, really happen to know each other. So I have a friend, like the photos of you with Joe Biden, for instance, remind me of my friend Maya Weinstein, who is like a very public activist now. And she's someone who I knew whom the story you explained about sharing your story related a lot to me, because I know that she also experienced that, and I know that's not an easy thing to do, to like sit in front of a group of your peers to share. But you mentioned like your friends were saying after that, like, you need to do more with this, like you need to get the word out. Like, were there other people coming up to you who weren't your friends who were giving you those words of encouragement other than I mean?
Yeah, so like after the event, there was a lot of people coming up to me, just like hugging me and saying, "Oh, it's going to be all right. You should continue to do this work. You should continue to speak out," which is very inspiring to me because I didn't think that I would get that type of response after I told my story. I thought that it was just going to be like my friends kind of just like making sure I was okay and things like that. But it was actually more words of encouragement, like, "Hey, other people need to hear this. You should start speaking out." So getting that from friends and just people I didn't know that went to the same school as me in the neighboring schools was really inspiring and encouraging for me, and it just pushed me to go forward.
Yeah, I guess jumping a little bit forward now, like what was it like to start taking on these different roles? So I know It's On Us was one of the first roles that you took on, but like what was that like for you, and how did that opportunity come about exactly?
Are you talking about for It's On Us?
Yeah, for It's On Us.
Okay, so for It's On Us, I found out about them on social media. I remember the first time they launched, and it went viral on social media. It was like the #1 hashtag because that was when Obama was in office and he launched this initiative. So I think that was in 2014. So I didn't join in 2014. I joined the year after because I still wanted to like do more research on what It's On Us exactly was and what they exactly do. So then I recently found out that It's On Us was already on my campus and there were already students that were organizing around It's On Us. So I kind of reached out to them. I know they did pledge drives on campus, but it was like, for me, I felt like pledge drives weren't enough to combat sexual assault. So I always wanted to do more. So then It's On Us came out with the advisory committee. So I applied for that. And with the advisory committee, you have to do other events on campus outside of the pledge drive. You have to do events on consent. You have to have conversations on sexual assault. You have to work with your administration to do events on campus, which is what I wanted to do. So after that, I started doing events on campus, which led me to connect with other survivors, hear their stories, and help them through their reporting process. So maybe a few months after continuously like doing events and helping students, that's when Joe Biden came. For the Joe Biden event, I was just supposed to help organize the event and pass out tickets, which is fine. Mm-hmm. But then I got a call late at night, and they're like, "Oh, you have to introduce the vice president on stage, and we want you to share your story." And that was maybe 2 or 3 days before he came. So I'm like, I'm happy, but it's like I'm so scared because I never told my story on camera in front of over 3,000 people for the entire city of Atlanta to see. Like, that was very, very scary for me. Like, I literally, words can't explain how I felt. It was just a huge shock. So the day of the event, I go there. I'm backstage. They're like telling me like what we're going to do, going over my speech and stuff. And then I see all these people turn the corner backstage. It's like a whole crowd of people. So I'm like, who are these people? So everyone was like dressed in black suits. And then once they like dispersed, Joe Biden was in the middle. I was so shocked. It was just so cool. I'm like, oh my God, you're Joe Biden. He was like, hey, what's your name? We just started talking. I started sharing my story a little bit before we went on stage. I actually almost had a panic attack backstage because I was scared to go on stage. Like, one of the Secret Service agents were just telling us like what we're gonna do when we get up there, how we should sit. If there's any rioters there, just remain seated, remain calm. And I'm just like, oh my God, I'm so scared. I don't want to talk. So when I went up there, I barely looked in the crowd. Like, I heard everybody cheering and clapping, but it was like, I'm so scared. I don't want to look at anybody. So it was just a happy moment. When I told my speech on stage, surprisingly, I didn't cry as much as I thought I would. There were like a little bit of tears shed, but it wasn't how I was when I first told my story, like the shaking and things like that. So like after I told my speech, Joe Biden came up. He gave me a hug. He gave me a kiss on the cheek, and then he spoke. So that was a really good day for me. And like ever since that day, that's how my activism has like continued, and more survivors have reached out to me. More people are inspired by me. So I really think It's On Us because they gave me the courage to speak up. Not necessarily saying that I didn't speak up in past like situations, like the event I mentioned where I first told my story, but they gave me the courage to go in front of a huger audience to speak and continue to do work on my campus. Like my It's On Us mentor, his name is Nicholas Kitchell. He no longer works with It's On Us anymore, but he was very helpful for me. We had very good conversations outside of what It's On Us is and what we're supposed to do. It was just more of a friend that I had like throughout my like healing process, talking to him like every other day. So I really appreciate how they were very hands-on with student survivors that they work with.
Mm-hmm. What was that like, though? You mentioned like having Nicholas as the mentor, and I think we'll get back to that at some point. But what was that like for you to have the vice president like taking such a strong stand, not just like against like violence against women and sexual violence, but taking such a strong stand like next to you? It's I feel like they're like chills like just to.
It was very chilling for me. It's just crazy because I've never seen like a presidential administration that was invested in survivors, because I just think like people don't care about sexual violence, and we're living with an administration now that perpetuates it and doesn't want to take it seriously. So it was very empowering and helpful to see that a vice president has, and also president as well, has started this initiative that helps survivors and actually took the time out of their schedules to travel to different college campuses and talk about sexual assault and letting people know that like they're not alone, there are resources and what you can do to stop it on your campus. So it was just very empowering for me. It wasn't my first time seeing Joe Biden in person. I've seen him when I went to the White House and the United States Women's Summit. In both situations, he talked about sexual assault. Mm-hmm. So it was very good to see him keeping that conversation going.
Yeah. Yeah, I mentioned that because I feel like so for me, I graduated college a long time ago, 2014, and that it was literally like months before It's On Us was introduced, and Joe Biden was still doing like there was another initiative called the One Is Too Many initiative, and like that was great, but there wasn't anything that really was focused on campus and caught on like wildfire. Like It's On Us. And so I mean, I'm really happy for you, and like the fact that and actually not just for you, but like for people who are at George Washington University, where I went still, or people who are at all the campuses, because one thing I noticed is that it's so much more of a conversation now. Just to like follow up on that for a second, like how was it difficult at all for you to get other students engaged in like learning about well, not I don't want to say learning about sexual assault, but engaged in the conversation just generally? Or was it not as difficult as you think it would be?
It was difficult. I know a lot of events that we had on campus and off campus, it was the same students. And the same students, and when I say the same students, I mean the same organizers and activists that have been fighting against the issue since they came to college. So it was very hard to get new people to come in. So there were only situations where we had like very large amount of students come in when a survivor decided to speak out and go against the institution, and there was a huge protest. So when there's protests and there's media, I noticed that more students came because more students wanted to listen. Either they wanted to listen or they wanted to be on camera. So it was kind of a win and a lose at the same time, because like, are you really invested in learning about sexual assault and how to get involved? Or do you want to just be on TV doing an interview to post on social media? So it was just a lot of times where the same students kept coming into meetings, kept coming into teach-ins and events. But the more that survivors spoke out, the more survivors started to show up to events. So that was actually a good idea for us, and it was actually a good result to see that more survivors say, okay, you're speaking out, you're being vocal, you're holding the institution accountable. I want to do the same thing. I want to come to this event. I want to get help and talk about it. So I also saw an increase in attendance in that way as well, but definitely in a way that when it caught media attention, a lot of students decided to show up as well.
Mm-hmm. Is there like, are there any, I feel like, because when you're on a college campus, you get so many different perspectives. were there any students who you've met who were really transformed by the experience of being involved with the work you were doing with It's On Us on campus?
Um, there was a situation where I believe it was my sophomore year. That was when I first started my activism. There was a student that was accused of sexual assault. Um, so I talked to the survivor, and she explained to me the situation. I also went to talk to him to get the situation as well. There was a lot of miscommunication, not in regards to like intimacy or anything like that, but a lot of miscommunication around language and what what terms actually mean. Yeah. So with sexual assault, sexual harassment, it's not the same thing. One is verbal, one is physical, and a lot of people don't understand that. And what she explained to me, it was neither sexual assault or sexual harassment. He asked her a question, like one simple question, and she took that as sexual assault because her friend told her it was. So it's a lot of education that needs to happen on college campuses around language and terms when it comes to sexual assault. So once I talked to both of them individually about the situation, it was kind of coming to agreement, and both of them decided to get involved to educate people on sexual assault, the different terms, continue to do events on campus. I know a lot of issues when I worked with people in fraternities and sororities, the situations around sexual assault comes up a lot. So they also got involved. Like if your line brother or your line sister are accused of sexual assault, a lot of people come to me to kind of just talk about the situation and what they should do, which kind of results in them getting involved, getting their fraternity, sorority involved, or any organization that's on campus to fight against sexual assault. So I notice a lot of times when issues of sexual assault come up in certain groups or certain orgs, they also start to want to get involved and educate themselves on how to combat sexual violence within their organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one thing I'm really curious to learn from you is just like you mentioned, like going to Spelman, you mentioned like different communities, like struggling with or I shouldn't say struggling with sexual violence, but like facing sexual violence, because it's a reality that like Greek life often faces it. But right. I'm more curious, like looking at the more national perspective, like at an HBCU or specifically like within our community, just from your experience, like how is activism different, or like how might you approach your work differently than like someone else who is not a like person of color or a woman of color?
I've noticed that the experience of fighting against sexual assault is very different at HBCUs and opposed to PWIs, which is a difference in also the Black community and the white community. In the Black community, I feel like when people experience sexual violence, they're told to not even talk about it and keep it a secret because we don't want to put one of our own in jail and we have to protect our own, which kind of leads, like, especially young Black girls to fend for themselves and cope with their trauma on their own. And for Black boys who experience sexual violence or are taught toxic masculinity, it leads to kind of a sense of entitlement in the community. For HBCUs, we're already like underfunded. So we have to focus on our image, funding, and getting enrollments. So getting students to come to college. So when the issue of sexual assault comes up, HBCUs kind of shy away from that conversation because they just don't want to talk about it, because we're trying to get more students to come to our school. We're not trying to have this bad image. So that's very problematic, because you have students on your campus that are being sexually assaulted, and you're not trying to do everything that you can to help these students to make sure they have like a safe education free of sexual violence. So that's very problematic. What I see at PWI campuses, they definitely get more recognition than HBCUs. We see this with things like Brock Turner. Brock Turner was national news for months, like ongoing months, because it was a white woman being sexually assaulted. As opposed to Rape at Spelman, which was a Black woman being sexually assaulted, that was national news for maybe a week or two. So it's like, it's very problematic to see that in these conversations of sexual violence, white women are always the center of everything, and we exclude marginalized groups out of the conversation. So I think that's definitely an issue, not with just HBCUs protecting perpetrators and not protecting survivors, but also society making it seem as though people who are a part of marginalized groups don't matter when they experience sexual violence, and that needs to change.
Yeah, and I think it's, like, to your point, one thing that's really interesting, just like as I was alluding to at the beginning, is that you have done all these things, right, within your work. So you have like all these positions that you're holding, all this effort that you're putting in, not just on the campus level, but the national level. And I feel like oftentimes for like, well, especially for like, well, for Black people, for people of color, or for like women, you know, you often have to like do this much to even be on the radar of people,
Right.
like other people might be doing this much. So I don't know. It's really interesting. I'm wondering from you though, like looking at how you approach what you do. What advice do you have for people who aren't in that dominant group when they're going into an activist group? So I'll mention, for example, I'm going this Friday, I'm going to give a presentation, and it's to a group at University of Maryland, and it is like UMD's Shabbat group. So it's like all Jewish students, or mostly Jewish students in attendance. So I feel like as I'm used to going to campuses, oftentimes I'll stick out like a sore thumb, but I'm wondering, like from your perspective, like what advice do you have for me or for people who are going into those difficult situations where you're trying to advocate and accomplish some change, even though your perspective is different?
So you're asking me as a person of color going into white dominated spaces, or am I getting it wrong?
No, I'm pretty much, yeah, that's it.
Okay. That's so hard to do, because when I go into like meetings or I help teach trainings or whatever, it's always white dominated, and it's so hard because it's like you want to talk about like Black issues and centering marginalized groups, but you can't because people don't understand what intersectionality is when it comes to fighting against sexual violence. So it's just so hard. Like, oh my gosh. But I would definitely say you have to hold people accountable for what they do and what they lack, basically. I remember I was in a meeting and people didn't want to talk about intersectionality. So it was just like, you have to take accountability for the knowledge that you lack. Because when you get into the work of sexual violence, you're not just fighting for one type of survivor. You're not just fighting for a white woman. You're fighting for Black women. You're fighting for Black men. You're fighting for men in general. You're fighting for children. You're fighting for disabled folks, trans folks, queer folks. Like, you're fighting for everyone. It's not one type of survivor. So that's why I get a kind of weird feeling when people make statements like, this is what a survivor looks like. There's no direct description of what a survivor looks like or what a survivor is supposed to do. So I feel like going into those spaces is all about accountability. Like, if you're in this work and your work is not centering marginalized groups, then who's your work really for at the end of the day?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, and I relate to that piece of advice in so many ways. Like in the back, because you mentioned it's like really tough to know how do you even answer that question. Like, what do you do? And I'll also say, just like in like full-time working, whether it was on my college campus, like in a lot of settings, like that's something that you face and that you continue to face, like being one of the only Black person in the room, or even if you're not, like being underrepresented in your voice. So like maybe you're at an event or at a conference where it's like all of the speakers are, you know, white people or white men mostly, or like, you know, something that doesn't represent you in some way. And I think that's one thing that makes, I don't know, I don't like to like generalize, but I'll say, I'm happy to generalize on this. Like, I feel like that's one thing that makes like activists who are from communities that are marginalized oftentimes like more amazing, because you're stepping up into in combating the like you're overcoming the fact that like you have this
Right.
barrier of like not being included and being overlooked, to then also go on to share your story, or also go on if it's a non-survivor to like fight for what you want, even though this isn't often respected. Like I'd love to know from you, like, what advice do you have just in general for activists, not just for people of color, but like for anyone who you know, who's probably considering getting started in getting involved with It's On Us or NRIP on campus, any organization on their campus?
I always want to remind people that fighting against sexual violence is not about what organization you're a part of and what organization you join. Combating rape culture, you can just start in your friend groups, like having these simple conversations on what sexual assault is, and especially on what consent is, because it's very, I don't want to say sad, but I'm just going to say sad. It's very sad that a lot of people don't understand what consent is and what consent looks like. So definitely having those conversations within your friend group and actually calling out rape culture when you see it. So the quote unquote locker room talk, or people just having conversations about women or men or queer folks just being homophobic, transphobic, and things like that. Just calling those little things out and making sure that people understand how those words are hurtful and also how it perpetuates violence. So having those conversations starting within your friend group. And also, if you want to join organizations, there's a lot of organizations on different college campuses that combat sexual violence. If there's not, you can start an organization. You can always register as a new student organization. I know a lot of situations where a lot of students who want to combat sexual violence, their school won't let them start that organization. So there's a lot of activist organizations that are not registered, but they are safe spaces, especially within the Atlanta University Center. There's a lot of organizations that are not registered that do a lot of work around sexual violence on campus and off campus. So definitely reaching out to different organizations within your campus and also off campus. Having those conversations on social media, having those conversations with administration, actually making sure that administration is doing their work on what they're supposed to do, not violating Title IX. Make sure students are educated on what Title IX actually is. I feel like, especially in the AUC, 90% of students don't know what Title IX is and don't know what their rights are under Title IX. So actually making sure people know about that and know that language, and just continuing to educate people. I know a lot of people ask me what to do when a survivor tells you they've been sexually assaulted. The first thing you should do is make sure they're okay. Let them know that you believe them and that you support them and that they're not alone. It's important to let survivors kind of take control in the reporting process and what they want to do. You can't push someone to report. You can only be there for them. So kind of just taking step by step with them. A lot of people also ask me, how do they reach out to survivors and stuff like that? For me, I've never directly reached out to survivors or asked someone if they're a survivor if they're not comfortable with telling me. Like, I'm not trying to push you to that limit. So when you're ready to talk to me, I'll be open ears. It's all about patience with people because they've just experienced a traumatic event in their life. So it's also always about being patient. But I would say to definitely start just having these conversations within your friend group and then going into activism, reaching out to different organizations, actually educating yourself on sexual violence before you get into this work, because you don't want to give people the wrong information.
That's a ton of great advice. And I think one thing that like resonates with me a lot is like the point about like you're not going up to people like, hey, are you a survivor? Hey, tell me, like you're not asking people that, and you're not putting them on the spot in that way. And I think that's really, that's something that I somehow knew going into this, I guess was 2013 to 2014, like going into my senior year at GW, where I was president of Students Against Sexual Assault. So I had to like take in it, I had to consider all the pieces you were saying, where it's like, you're not, it is like, it's so hard for me still to explain. Like, you're not leading, you're kind of following, or like leading from behind, or whatever, like whatever the term is. But like, I think all of what you're saying is really great advice for people to consider. Um, it's hard because I've spoken to groups, like I mentioned high school groups, and one of the groups that comes to mind, they were asking, like, if I know someone was sexually assaulted, if they tell me, like, what do I do? And I was saying, well, you have to let the survivor lead, and they're responsible for, like, let them have the autonomy or the agency to choose what they want to do. But then, like, with a lot of high school kids, even, and a ton of people, it's hard for them to understand, like, but I know someone did something bad, like, shouldn't I report them? And like, do all, and it's like, I love how what you're saying is like affirming, like, you have to let the survivor lead, make sure they understand their options. One of the, I guess the last questions I have really is that if you had a magic wand, and you, I've been putting this into interviews a lot more now, but if you had like a magic wand, and you could like just wave the wand and you could shape your future, and then there was a book or a documentary about it. I have to work on how I phrase that. But like, if your life were a book or a documentary, once it's all said and done, like, what do you want that title to be, and why? Like, what do you want to accomplish other than the awesome stuff you're already accomplishing?
I was thinking about this question last night. It's like, I don't know what title I want. I don't know. I would definitely say overcoming obstacles, because I've experienced sexual abuse as a child, rape in college. I've been through a relationship where I just experienced domestic violence, and I've kind of came out of it all, like overcome it all, and I didn't become what happened to me. Like, I could have turned to drugs, or I could have turned to alcohol, but I didn't. I kind of took what happened to me and made it into, okay, let me help other people so they won't go through this alone like I did. So I would definitely say overcoming obstacles, because I've been through a lot, I've experienced a lot, I've seen a lot. Some things that people know, but some things that people will never know, because life is just hard for some people, especially for people of color. So it's like just overcoming them obstacles and just letting people know that you don't have a negative past can't turn into a positive future. Like, you don't have to become what happened to you.
Yeah. And I could say, like, even just talking with you, I feel that, like, obviously there's a lot of struggle in there, and it comes like for all of us for so many different reasons, right? But I feel like there's so much strength in you and what you're doing with your life and with your work. Like, I don't know. I feel like, people could throw a lot at you, and you would just be able to handle it, and like maybe dodge a little bit, but, you'd be able to handle it. And I think that's really important, and I'm sure that's going to serve you really well going forward.
Thank you.
Could you tell me more though? One thing I want to get into just a little bit more. So Biden Foundation, love Joe Biden, great. He's great. He's amazing. Better than I do. But just thinking about that, like, what are you excited? Because I know that was just announced, like your role as part of that was just announced. So what are you looking forward to with that?
I'm looking forward to having a conversation around his speeches, because I feel like his speeches are very heteronormative. They focus on the woman being sexually assaulted by the football player or fraternity member. But I just want him to understand that when you talk about sexual violence, you have to be inclusive with your speeches. Like, sexual violence is not just something that happens to women, in this case, white women, because that's what the mainstream media wants us to believe. So I feel like we should talk about same-sex sexual violence, violence against disabled folks and trans folks. So definitely talking to them about how we move forward and center marginalized groups when it comes to sexual violence. But I am excited to kind of meet everyone and see what type of work we're going to do, because I know that It's On Us is connected to the Biden Foundation, but It's On Us is more focused on events on campus. So I really am looking forward to doing kind of like a national thing with the Biden Foundation.
Awesome. And yeah, at some point I'll have Joe on here and he'll be on and we'll talk about that. But no, I'm sure that he'll hear that and he'll feel that. And one thing I just want to say about him, other than like this becoming like a Joe Biden shout out love fest, but like I was on a call maybe in September. It was right around all the stuff with like Betsy DeVos and Title IX, and he was on this call, and it was like maybe you were on it too. I don't know, but it was like I'm pretty sure NRAPE on campus was on there. Like It's On Us, all these organizations were on there, and he was on, and it was not recorded or anything closed to media, but like what I'll say is like his fire and his passion is like,
yeah, I was on that call.
I heard exactly what you're saying about like being more inclusive with the speeches, but like the fire and the passion is what I love, and I'm glad that you could be around that and be part of that. And so one thing I want to ask as we kind of wrap up is where can people learn more about you and your work?
I would definitely say my Twitter account. I post everything on Twitter. I'm always tweeting about like sexual violence. I'm always calling people out. I'm always reaching out to survivors via Twitter, or they reach out to me. A lot of the conversations I have around sexual violence is on Twitter. You can also reach out to me by the groups that I work with. It's On Us, Enrich Campus, You're 9, Break the Cycle, all these amazing sexual assault organizations that help survivors. So it's just a variety of ways to just get involved with the work and just reach out to different organizers.
Awesome. And so for anyone who wants to learn more about 108 Impact, which they probably already do because they're seeing this, and they probably saw the video title too, like it's www.lets.care and @LetsYouCare on all social media. And then I'm at MattScottGW on all the social media. But again, thanks for joining. I really appreciate it. I appreciate you sharing your wisdom, and I'm more than anything excited to see what you accomplish, because I kind of forget like this is only the beginning. This is really it's barely the beginning. Do awesome things, but thanks again for being part of this.
Thank you for having me.
Cool. And for anyone who's watching, until next time, keep impact.